Welcome everyone. So I'd just like to welcome you to our latest Heterodox Academy Laurier event. I'm Jeff Horstman, one of the co-chairs of our local chapter or campus community, along with Michael Pavlin and Will McNally. So I'm going to start my introduction, a very brief introduction I promise, by quoting 4 lines of polling data from a recent report by Eric Kaufman, who we hosted here back in May. And man, have I been getting mileage out of this report. Okay, so number 1. Respondents oppose teaching children that there is no such thing as biological sex, only gender preference, by 85 to 15. Number 2. By a 70 to 30 margin, Canadians oppose the idea that Canada is a racist country, and a similar share do not want this taught at school. Number 3. By 70 to 30, people prefer a colorblind rather than color-conscious approach to issues in society. And number 4, Canadians oppose the idea of separating students in schools by race, the privileged and oppressed, by 92 to 8. So what parents are beginning to understand, if they pay any attention at all, is that schools are really teaching the exact opposite of this. They're really not aligned with the values and beliefs of the broader Canadian public. And when parents find this out, they're not particularly pleased about it. And they ask uncomfortable questions, and this really challenges those sort of running the system. So this is why even having these sorts of discussions is often difficult to arrange. And as an example of this, several parents, including myself, have been trying to work through parent councils to host this type of event at local schools, and the responses varied, but sort of became clear over time. There was a general reluctance to entertain anyone who might express views that were different from those of the board. Now, to be clear, these parent councils are legislatively tasked with enhancing the accountability of the education system to parents. So that's straight from the Education Act. So I think we need to remind parents, any out there that hear this, that they don't need anybody's permission to host parent information events, right? Like these school councils, through the school councils. So I'm very thankful for Heterodox Academy and Wilfrid Laurier University for supporting this event, so we can really have an academic discussion of education policy, even if it seems as though the education bureaucracy isn't particularly keen on this type of public discussion. And I'm especially grateful to our 2 speakers today. So Scott Davies is a professor in the Department of Leadership, Higher and Adult Education at OISE, that's the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, and previously held the Canada Research Chair in Data, Equity, and Policy in Education. Professor Davies' research focuses on large-scale data, stratification, and policy in education. He has supervised students on topics including summer learning gaps, private schools, school bullying, structural stratification of higher education, cultural capital technology, and student engagement. He teaches courses in the Educational Leadership and Policy program. Stephen Reich is a PhD candidate in Education Policy and Leadership at the University of Toronto. In 2024, he completed his MA thesis titled, "Does Ontario's Ministry of Education Promote Critical Theory in K-12 Education?" which empirically demonstrated the incursion of critical theory into the ministry. Prior to his graduate work in education, Stephen practiced law in Toronto for 23 years. So Scott and Stephen are going to present for about an hour, I think. Take, you said, a 5-minute stretch break. You can tell these guys are teachers.
Yes.
And then present another 30 minutes before finishing off.
We can even do calisthenics.
With another 30 minutes of questions, so we'll hopefully wrap up by 9. So buckle up, and please join me in welcoming our speakers.
So thanks, Jeff. So I'm Scott. I'm just going to say just a few words, but it's going to be mainly the Stephen show tonight. And I'm just going to set up Stephen's MA thesis. What he's going to be presenting on mainly his findings and main interpretation of his data. From his thesis, it was an exhaustive analysis of education policy in Ontario. And I come up from this angle as an educational researcher. That you can see there for many decades, I did, I think, very positive research partnerships with a whole bunch of organizations, Ministry of Education, HECO, ICREO, school boards in this area, in the Royal Society of Canada. So I really like the idea of evidence-generated policy, and where we try to test interventions and so forth, and develop best practices. But I began to notice that, in more recent years, there's been a decoupling of a lot of policy from evidence, from good research, from something that we would consider to be rigorous. So that was one observation I made. Another one is that increasingly that more policy was using the vocabulary of critical theory. Stephen's going to talk about what that is, but I come from a sociology background, and my approach or my reaction to that is like, really? That's going to inform your policy? So I was motivated when Stephen came to me and said, I want to do this thesis where I'm going to track what's been going on in education policy for decades and analyze it and critique it. I said, yeah, I like two things about that. One, I like the idea of returning to more empirical or research-based reasoning in education policy. And I also like the idea that critical theory, which he will describe, should not be this sacred thing that's immune from criticism. When I was in Stephen's seat as a grad student, there was lots of Marxists amongst the professors in sociology, as you can imagine, but it was okay to criticize, to talk about the problems with it. And somehow in recent years, it's become more sacred. So that was my motivation for supervising Stephen's thesis. See what you think. And if there's anything you don't like, it's my fault.
I'm just curious, give me a show of hands. Who here is either a parent with someone, a child in public school, or had a child in public school within the last, let's say, 10 years? Anyone? Oh, great. Okay, who here is a teacher? Wonderful. Oh, good. I'm glad we have anyone here a principal or board member? School board member? No. University professor? Excellent. University student? You're here, you've got a big job. All right, so let's get started. I just want to say how I started this off was I was given a bunch of parental concerns from parent councils and from individual parents. And so I just want to go over what some of these concerns are, and if you have other concerns, then you can jump in or we'll discuss them after. So first concern, I have my little pointer stick here, devaluation of merit. Everyone gets a trophy. Second concern, de-streaming and the loss of advanced or specialized programs. And if they haven't been lost yet, then discussion that we're going to lose them. The math program across the board, and stuff being talked about that 2 + 2 = 5, really. Too much screen time in school, and then the question about do we bring, should everyone have a Chromebook, not have a Chromebook, benefits, detriments, etc. Too many learning disability designations, but no workable solutions. So we're willing to give 30% of the children in public school an IEP, an independent educational program, and say that they have a learning disability, but then we don't know what to do with it. Meanwhile, the children who have what used to be considered actual disabilities don't get the support that they need, because all the effort is going into those 30% of kids. And we're going to talk about, do they actually have a learning disability, or is it, as one teacher said, NBT, never been taught. Frustration over parents' need to help with schoolwork. So this is the crying fits at night in high school, the kids who are overwhelmed by the number of projects that they have to do, and the parent involvement. Lack of classroom discipline, and that includes violence in the classroom. Learning disruption, noisy classrooms where nobody can concentrate. Lack of focus on subject matter mastery. That's a big one. And I'll say it right here, but we're going to talk about it more when we talk about educational policy. If after 6 months, the student doesn't remember what they learned 6 months ago, it's wasted time. So keep that in mind. Too much focus on activism, which then creates too much divisiveness. No serious arts education. And by serious arts education, I mean teaching kids how to read music, Teaching kids chord theory so that, for their entire life, they can pick up a piece of music and play along at a party or at home or with their friends, pick up a guitar. Or art, learning the fundamentals of drawing. We don't take arts education seriously. We bring in iterant teachers, bring an egg carton, and we'll make a caterpillar out of it. Too many self-directed projects, right? Nobody likes doing them. Parents hate them. Kids don't like them. Kids know that it's BS. That's a problem. And then loss of national identity. And I see this. I have a 20-year-old at home. Doesn't know Canadian spelling. Never learned anything really about Canada. Doesn't know any Canadian folk songs. Doesn't know anything about Canadian culture. Basically, the kids of today assume that whatever's going on in the United States is Canada. And whatever the issues are in the United States are the exact issues in Canada. So basically, we've got a power conflict between critical theory and pedagogy on one hand. And pedagogy, for those of you who don't know, is just a fancy way of saying teaching. And cognitive science-based pedagogy on the other hand. And here, if you're not familiar with these terms, these are some of the words that you see around them. So critical theory and pedagogy, that's what's being dealt with when we talk about hegemonic power, intersectionality, privilege, patriarchy, microaggressions, white privilege, gender identity, social justice, those kind of words. Cognitive science-based pedagogy is when you hear them talking about research from psychologists, from cognitive neuropsychologists, teaching best practices, educational psychology. That's learning science. So cognitive science-based pedagogy is based on experimental research. And of course, the university students among you will know this, maybe all of you know this, but that's when we do an experiment with a control and a test, and it's replicable. And that's the most important thing, that it's replicable and that it's produced significant results with medium to large effect sizes, right? Because if the effect sizes are smaller, we can't replicate it, then it's useless and it's of no use to us in setting policy. The purpose, and I'm going to speak about cognitive science-based pedagogy first, so then we can compare critical theory-based pedagogy. So, the purpose of cognitive science-based curriculum, everyone is prepped from the starting line. So everyone has a fair start. Now this is important, and I'm going to say it this way. If you come from a middle-class family, chances are your parents have taken you to a museum, you have a house full of books, they read you stories at night, they may even have bought flashcards, so before you even start school, they're busy quizzing you on your math facts, they're trying to teach you to read, all of those things, right? Now I'm going to compare that, and this is what I say the standard is when designing policy, if we really are talking about equity in sort of the common sense usage of the term. Okay, imagine a single parent living in Ontario housing with 3 children. That parent is working 3 jobs to put food on the table. The lived experience of those children is that 1-bedroom apartment and maybe the playground outside. That's the background knowledge that they have, that they come to school with. So, if you don't accommodate that, and you don't start everyone at the beginning line, those kids are already behind and they never catch up. So to me, you can talk equity out of your behind all you want, but it's not equity unless you address that fact, because the research says is the most important characteristic that determines how you're going to do in school is SES, socioeconomic status. The other purpose, making knowledge and skills stick long term. And as I said, if you don't remember it after 6 months, then it was a waste of time. Correcting misunderstandings early. So again, this is about teachers ensuring, a policy where teachers have to ensure that when they're introducing a subject, that any misunderstandings that kids might bring into the classroom are corrected. So again, it's prepping everyone for the start line. The purpose of cognitive science-based curriculum is to eliminate, to the greatest degree possible, the effects of family wealth or family poverty, to eliminate the effect of family resources to help. If parents are sending their kids to specialized math programs and hiring tutors to teach them to read and then tutors to do their high school projects, then Is that equitable? You can say yes or no. And of course then to eliminate the need for outside tutoring. The reason that this is the purpose is so that the level of achievement attained by a student is wholly dependent upon merit, which is a dirty word in critical theory. Merit equals effort plus natural talent. And I have to say to the critical theorists, there is such a thing as biology, and people do come with their own talents. Some people have talent, some people have no talent. But the purpose of a cognitive science-based pedagogy is to make sure that everybody is proficient. Because once everybody is proficient, those students with certain talents in certain areas can then soar above and accomplish what they do. And there's a national purpose to that. Because if we want to do something as a country, other than just have bureaucratic jobs and that layer of bureaucracy which occupies most of Canadian employment, then we have to encourage people's greatness, to innovate, to invent, to produce culture. These are all things that a cognitive science-based pedagogy does. Okay, let's look at the curriculum. Let's look at what that curriculum would look like. So first of all, it's reverse engineered designed from grade 12 to grade 1, right? Where do we want all students to be in grade 12? And then let's reverse engineer it down to grade 1. It's designed by subject experts. It's not designed by an ideologue. It's not teachers swapping slideshows online or on Facebook or doing some Google research to create a curriculum that they're going to teach for the day. It's designed by subject experts. It's the same material for everybody until grade 10. So I want you to imagine, if we don't do that, a grade 9 teacher has students coming in from multiple schools, multiple classrooms. That teacher has no idea what level the kids are at and what they know and what they don't know, right? They have absolutely no idea. If we ensure the same material for everyone and the same standards, and the accountability is that the kids have now incorporated this knowledge so they know it and they can apply it in new situations, then the teacher is taking everyone at the same level. Now, after grade 10, you want to then maybe specialize, because kids can go off and maybe specialize in sciences or arts or trades or technical, and I think that that's probably a great idea. But up until then, everyone should be guaranteed the same education. It's logically sequenced, right? It doesn't start here. I mean, now there's a whole thing in teaching about spiraling, right? So you teach something but not very deeply, and the kids don't remember it, and then the next year you teach it again, and then you spiral again, and then the following year you teach it again, and in grade 8 they're still giving the kids multiplication and long division quizzes because the kids haven't done it. Terrible. There is no evidence supporting that as a good way of teaching. It should be logically sequenced from level A to B to C, etc. We start with the basics, and the basics are real books, paper workbooks, right? Because we know from research that you learn better and you are less distracted when you have paper in front of you. It's important. Yes, we live in a digital society and you're going to convert to a digital form, but you have to start off your learning with paper. And also, that allows you, if you have textbooks and you have workbooks, that the curriculum is staged. So you move on, and kids that are falling behind or having difficulty can go back and they can practice till they master it. The kids who are advanced can then move forward within that book. In fact, even imagine this, a school designed so that all the subjects are taught at the same time. So you're in grade 2 and you're struggling with math, but you're reading already, books, chapter books. Well, maybe for English you move up one grade, and you're in grade 2 for English, and then you come back down for grade 1 for math. What would be the problem with that, right? Because it's addressing the children's needs, which is what education should be about. The other thing, handwriting, right? We have to teach handwriting, and we have to teach cursive. And the reason is because the research says is that you actually learn better when you handwrite. And the reason is that if you're a competent typer, you can type at the same speed as someone lectures or that someone speaks. So there's no working memory process going on. It's going, the input is going in your ear and you're just typing it. When you have to handwrite, which is slower than typing, you are automatically engaging your working memory to understand the material and summarize it. It's the first stage of study. So as you're making your notes, you're already studying, right? So then when you review it and then you make notes out of those notes, you're further studying. That's how to get the information into children's, adults as well, long-term memory so that it's accessible for problem solving. The other thing that I don't understand, and I've read and through the research, 700 ministry documents, everything that was online from the 1980s to 2022. I read every curriculum. The curricula are like 350 pages long. You could basically take the whole thing and put it in the trash bin because there's nothing in there that a teacher can use, and I don't even think the teachers could use it. I give some examples in my thesis of what a teacher in grade 3 is supposed to do. It's impossible. You wouldn't even get through 10 pages of the curriculum, and you'd be at the end of the year. So who needs it? It's just verbiage. I don't know. It's perhaps providing an income for someone who works at the ministry. But where's the typing instruction? If we want kids to be able to produce written work, why are we not teaching them how to type? I mean, that's ridiculous, right? That should be going on in elementary school, right? We have to ensure that kids are typing at 60 words per minute so that they are able to actually produce written work. You're wondering why kids don't like writing and kids don't like reading? Well, they can't read with automaticity. The Human Rights Commission has already told us that, right? So reading is hard. You're constantly engaging your working memory, which is of limited capacity. So reading is hard. Writing is hard because you don't have any tools with which to actually convey information through writing, because we don't teach typing and we don't teach script handwriting. We're actually making children disabled. The policy of the ministry is making children disabled. And the final thing is mastery. That is the goal. We want students to master the knowledge and tools in every subject area so that and listen, all we can teach, we can't, all this 21st century learning and whatever, it's absolute bullshit. We can't know what's going to be in 25 years, right? We don't even know what the world is going to be like and what the employment market is going to be like in 5 years. All we can teach them is what we know today. Then it's up to them as young adults. We release them from the nest, and it's up to them to then do their own learning and go off for further learning, and they're the ones who will innovate. So why don't we just focus on what we know till today, and let's teach that. That should be the ministry policy. Okay, staging, which we talked about, allows for individual advancement. So you stage the curriculum, so you can move up, you have to go back, you have to master something, you can go back. Teaching the tools needed for each subject area, like typewriting, like script writing. In science, you have to understand the scientific method. In history, you have to understand historical analysis, the written stories from multiple perspectives. All those are tools, and we have to children don't know any of that. We have to teach them. Critical thinking skills for each subject area. Now, this is a big one because the ministry policy assumes, we're going to teach kids critical thinking skills. Well, research has actually been done on this. You cannot teach critical thinking skills because they are not cross-curricular. So whenever you see cross-curricular, you can take that and scrunch it up and again, put it in the bin. It's not cross-curricular. It only becomes cross-curricular when you master each individual subject area so you can draw connections. But you can't draw those connections until you've mastered the subject areas. The primary focus should be national, and I talked about that already. Clear scripts for teachers. And this goes back to, why the hell are teachers having to do unpaid work in the evening to recreate curriculum and reinvent the wheel, right, to then deliver it in the classroom? I think teachers work hard enough during the day that that when they get released and they go home, that they should have home time with their family like everybody else. It's the ministry's responsibility to create the curriculum and to create the scripts for teachers so teachers know what they're supposed to be doing. Their professionalism comes from, and we're going to see this in a second. Well, actually, I'm going to hold off because we are going to talk about the role of teachers. Step-by-step instructions for the teachers, the opposite of what the curriculum is now, right? Here's what you do on day 1, this is what you do in the first month, this is what you do in the second month, this is what you do in the third month. So it's all staged, leading up to the next grade level. We don't want teachers to have to reinvent the wheel. We want them to frolic on the beach like that. The cognitive science-based classroom, distraction-free, right? Because children have undeveloped attention. So all those kids that are being referred for drugs for ADHD, this is because of the policy in the classroom, right? Like, look at the picture underneath it. Can you expect a young child to focus in that classroom on what the teacher's saying and instructing them? Like, seriously? We're going to look at a critical theory classroom and you'll tell me. Distraction-free. The desks in rows facing the front. The teacher. The teacher is the center of the classroom. That is who should be in the center, and movable, because a professional teacher is going to be able to say, you know what, we're going to practice our math, then push your desks aside, we're going to have baseball math, where I give you questions, you run to first base, you run to second base. Like, people are against the teacher being the center of the classroom, as if the teacher's just going to stand there and drone on for hours and hours, and it's boring, or whatever. No. Teacher-centered education means that the teachers are professional and they know children can only sit for a certain amount of time. So this is the frontal instruction. Now you're going to come to the board, you're going to do problems, we're going to have a spelling bee, we're going to have a race around the classroom. Movable desks. Focus on the teacher. Decorations and student work behind the students, at the back of the class where it's not distracting. Quiet classrooms, with the exception of the activities that I mentioned. And that's important because you know what's going on in many classrooms is they have the activity centers. The kids are running around screaming, and then the school hands out, or they force the parents to pay for noise-canceling headphones, right? As if the kids can't, because the kids can't concentrate. I couldn't concentrate with everyone screaming and yelling. So a quiet space. I mean, we're adults, we need quiet spaces to work. Why would children be any different? Student responsibility for classroom organization. You want to create community? It's not just words. Creating community means you take responsibility for your community. That means you clean up your classroom, everyone organizes the things in the classroom, you have a routine where the children are doing it. Even better would be if the school had a kitchen, or even not, for the students to have monitors that then set the tables or the desks so the children can eat if they do eat in the classroom. Something that ties the children, cleaning up after the day, right? We want children to be responsible for the places where they live. We're trying to develop responsible citizenship. This is part of it. And I'll say in kindergarten, when we're busy, trying to have earlier academics, forget the academics in kindergarten. Like, we're starting in kindergarten, the kids know nothing at the end of grade 12. Let's start the academics in grade 1, and kindergarten should be about all those things. How to set a table, how to make a meal, how to serve a meal, how to clean up, what are the manners that you do before that, teaching songs and dances, teaching them Canadian folk songs, all of those things so that they learn routines so then they're ready to be academic in grade 1. And no disrupting tech. No phones in the classroom. And that includes even at the high school level, because we all know that the students are not doing independent research on their cell phones, right? They're on social media or they're playing video games, while the teacher is checking their social media while they're sitting at their desk. So let's get rid of the cell phones altogether. We don't have to worry about teaching children tech. Chances are, if you're an adult, the 5-year-old in your classroom knows how to navigate technology much better than you do. So we don't need that in school. The role of the teacher. Expert, subject matter expert, subject teaching expert. That's where the professionalism comes in. The teacher designs different activities to cement knowledge and skills. That's the purpose. Practice makes perfect. Designs different ways to practice, and this is key. Learning science tells us unless you practice, you're not going to remember, and the practice has to be spaced. So first you have practice while they slowly master something, you move on to something else. Then you have practice of the first thing you taught interleaved with the second thing you taught, right? And that continues throughout the year. And the reason why we do that is we want the kids to remember this in a year, right? We don't want the next teacher in the grade up to have to repeat what we already taught. Practice. I don't know anyone who does anything well without practice. And it doesn't matter if you use your 4-point rubric and the kids get 90+%. They didn't practice and they don't know anything. Practice is what gets you to know things. Constant feedback. If you're going to give an assignment or a project and you're not going to speak to the student about it, don't give the project. There has to be constant feedback so that you check for misunderstandings and you check that the student is actually understanding the material, the tools, and is then later able to apply it. And then we talked about spaced practice, retrieving info, and applying it. Role of parents and family. Okay, the only role that parents and family should have is making sure that the kids show up at school, attending parent-teacher interviews, and that's it. You know what? I'm sure that most teachers would appreciate not getting phone calls every time something happens, you know, and most parents, and I was one of those parents, every 3 days, you know, your kid was sad at lunch. Your kid sneezed and their shirt is dirty. Your kid had a fight with another kid over a pen. He says it's his, the other kid, I was like, I'm at work, do you want me to leave my job and come do your job? Like, and I felt bad for the teachers because it's not that they wanted to call me. Those are the school policies. Those are the ministry policies, right? Let's detach that. Teachers are experts, right? When I go to the doctor, you know, when I was younger, my parents didn't come and call the doctor and need to know everything that was going on. We trusted that the doctor knew what they were doing and they had control of the situation while I was there, and then I left. And I went home and did my other activities. Let's trust teachers, you know, but let's trust teachers that are using a cognitive science-based method. Okay, proof that cognitive science-based pedagogy is success. I'm going to let you in on a secret. The policy that we've just covered is not the one governing Ontario's education system. Okay? After teacher quality, the most efficient, most effective for academic achievement. It's been replicated over and over. The most effective at closing gaps between high and low achievers. We say we want to do that, then let's adopt this policy as an educational policy. Eliminates the needs for remediation, accommodations, which I'm sure, I don't know how a teacher is supposed to accommodate 1/3 of her class or his class. You know, when you've got a class of 30 students, it's not possible and it doesn't happen. You know, basically the accommodations come down to, oh, you get extra time, right? Nobody ever learned better because of extra time. You learned better because you were taught better and you practiced and you got feedback and you were tested and quizzed and you were able to apply that information. So extra time doesn't help. It also eliminates the need for tutoring. And this is from studies done in Australia, where they actually allow certain schools to say, you know, we're going to try something different and let's measure it against the national average and see how we're doing. It reduces the needs for IEPs. And therefore we have the resources and the energy for students who actually need special supports, who aren't getting them right now. It raises the class average regardless of SES level. You want to talk about equity in the common sense meaning of the term? There it is. Okay, so what is going on in Ontario's ministry in terms of policy as it comes down? And, oh, sorry, we're not done yet about its successes. It eliminates 95 to 98% of dyslexia diagnoses. The Ontario Human Rights Commission even found that looking at meta-analyses of studies where you teach this properly, right? And most of our 30% of kids with LD designations, it's because of dyslexia. Again, NBT, never been taught. It's not dyslexia. Synthetic phonics for 16 weeks in grade 1. So you do not get any books. The teacher can read stories or whatever. No books. You spend 16 weeks doing phonics in grade 1. And they tested, this was Scotland, right? And they did this nationally. The kids in grade 7 were reading 3.5 years ahead of all others. Their spelling was 1.75 years ahead by grade 7. And it didn't matter what the SES level was, right? And you ask yourself, I mean, any policy person at the ministry, any principal could go and find this study. It's cited all over the place. It's the Scottish 7-year longitudinal study. Why are we not using it? It avoids students from lower SES households from falling behind. So isn't that what we want if we talk equity? It's the best preparation for higher order math, right? Not discovery math, not going out, not decolonizing math, going out into the garden and looking for patterns in the plants or whatever. No, it's having a direct instruction from the teacher and following the cognitive model. On global PISA tests, science students who have been taught through cognitive science-based methods score much better than all others, right? And that's internationally, we see that. Aha! So what is critical theory in education? Critical theory, I'm going to give you a definition, is a neo-Marxist, postmodern critique dividing society into the oppressors and the oppressed in order to remake society into one that centers the oppressed and their claims on resources. And that's the important part, their claims on resources. So think about all the bureaucrats and all the DEI people that are hired and the resources that they want to claim. It's not that they're doing it. They may look like someone in Ontario Housing, right? But it's not that you're giving resources to the children in Ontario Housing. You're giving them the six-figure salaries. So how does this work, right? So here's the things that are good and bad in critical theory. The majority is bad. Successful minorities are bad. Working to overcome obstacles in your life is bad. It's good being a victim. That's great. And what we really want to do is we want to get all the victims together so we can create a group of victims. So this is really, when we talk about critical pedagogy, it goes by a number of different terms. Culturally relevant or responsive pedagogy. In ministry documents, they call it CRRP, or CRAP, as I like to say. It's creating a classroom where each student is an avatar of their race or ethnicity and their gender identity. And the educational goal is to build up those identities, to inculcate the students with the principles of critical theory, but otherwise critical pedagogy recommends letting students do what they want as long as it stereotypically fits their racial, sexual, gender identities. And it's useful in that sense. It's opposed to traditional subjects in assessment. Critical pedagogy is meant to be the classroom practice to bring about a marginalized identity group revolution against the status quo, whatever that may be. It's not a general pedagogy designed to teach core competencies in reading or mathematics, unless those core competencies are redefined as tools necessary for the neo-Marxist redesign of society. It's very similar to Marxism's project to indoctrinate young children to cut ties with the past and to cut ties with their parents in order to disrupt present systems of authority. And that would include the teacher and parents. Oops. Let me just go back here. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. I'm going to have to do it this way. I'm very, very sorry. I may be good at this, but I'm not good at slideshows and technology.
This is just review.
This is review. This is your space. I hope that it was a very quick review. Okay, great. Okay, so the purpose of critical pedagogy here I've discussed. This just gives you something. Now this is really weird. There's this whole thing about now, and you see it all over the curriculum now. It's about if you do all this, you're anti-European, you ally the oppressed groups, you resist the rules of society, you dismantle everything, it brings joy. And I always wondered, where does that come from? Well, this actually comes from African American separatist writings about that realizing your history of oppression because of slavery and Jim Crow, that in doing so, it'll relieve your sense of responsibility that why can't I do better, and that will make you experience joy. How that applies in a Canadian classroom, I'm not sure. I don't think joy is usually a word that that children associate with school. I mean, it might be a sometimes fun, their friends are there, they learn something interesting. I'm not sure joy is there, but they've taken that concept of black joy and now it's all over the curriculum. That somehow, by doing all of this stuff, you're going to experience joy. So now let's look at some critical theory definitions. Equity. And this is important because people throw around these words and they're never defined by critical theorists. But I found the definitions in the ministry policy documents and writings by Ontario scholars who refer to those ministry documents. Equity is different from equality or fair or equal access or process because equity requires equal average identity group outcomes. Everybody gets an A+. Unequal outcomes is the only evidence required to prove systemic racism. So, if by groups, as they've defined it, that the outcomes are different, and remember, we're just talking about schooling, right? We're not talking about anything else in society that's of importance, because there's lots that is also equally as important to schooling. But in schooling, if the Albanian community doesn't do as well as, they don't really care about Albanians, they're just folded up into the white category. But just to use that as an example, as some other category, then that means there's systemic racism. Well, I mean, anyone who's done any research or quantitative study or statistics knows that's absolutely ridiculous. That's not how we determine causation. Diversity. Diversity does not mean that we want different people with their different opinions, their different life experiences. No. Diversity means the presence of specified identity groups viewed as marginalized. So, diversity doesn't include anyone who isn't marginalized according to the definition, right? Who is marginalized? The colors, black, they threw in brown, basically because of the states, because then they had to figure out, well, what do we do about the Hispanic people? And if we just have, black and white, well, that doesn't account for them, and they're a big part of the population. Well, we're going to give them a color. They're brown. How that translates in Canada is referring to, someone as disparate as from India or from Mexico or from the Philippines, as if they're all like the same, that they all have the same culture or whatever, which is even more ridiculous in Canada because many of those cultures actually better European heritage children in terms of academics and also in terms of earnings. So I'm not sure why they become marginalized. And then we've got the new ones, like the gender identity stuff. Sexuality, really, we've forgotten about. Like if you're gay or lesbian, that's boring. That's like old stuff. If you're a woman, again, that's boring, that's old stuff. The new marginalized group are all the people with new gender identities, non-binary, trans, etc. That's diversity. So if those people are included and we center their voices, that's what diversity is, not you. Notice what's missing, poor people. Children from low SES homes, right? We don't care about them. Well, I care about them, but in terms of ministry policy. Inclusion. Inclusion is centering the lived experiences of the specified identity groups viewed by critical theory as marginalized. So we put them in the middle, their voices are heard, and you have to silence your voice. Now, the person in the middle could be a complete idiot and have nothing really to contribute, and you, on the outside, might actually be quite smart and intuitive and have a lot to contribute, but too bad. In inclusion, you're excluded. Social justice. So social justice is two things. It's both a process and a goal. Social justice as a process is the act of becoming critically conscious of one's privilege or marginality based on the rules of critical theory that we've discussed, and engaging in self-reflection and group circles, kind of like the Marxist or the labor circles, to continually testify as to one's positionality and to hope for a socialist revolution, to overthrow capitalism, because that's in there too. Social justice as a goal is an unspecified utopia of liberation and freedom, but with no plan or design for implementation. So I always say, I sat through my classes at OISE, and they would talk about transformational change. Oh, we all want transformational change. And I said, well, wait a second. I'm not signing up for any change unless I know what the plan is, and I know what that change looks like. And then I might ask questions, and we would have to negotiate that, and then either I'm on board or I'm not on board. But the fact that we've now convinced a whole generation of new teachers through ed schools that their goal is to enact transformational change, and they can't tell you what that change is, I mean, that's strange, to say the least. Anything that stands in the way of equity, diversity, inclusion, social justice is racist, right? And this is materials from the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, circulated to teachers in the school board, and I've also seen this in material that is circulated to students, because teachers get this in their professional development days, and then they hand this out to students, who then fill out wheels where they define their identities. So what are this kind of things that now are considered, like I used to think racist was stereotyping people of different backgrounds. Well, first of all, believing that there's race, right? As opposed to, because I look at it this way, every in-group has a name for themselves and a name for the out-group. So I understand, for black people, they're black, everyone else is white. That's cool, right? But, now, I'm Jewish, right? So I'm Jewish, the out-group is Goyim, right? Or non-Jewish. But I don't expect people to identify as a non-Jew or as a Goy. I mean, Japanese people, Chinese people, everyone has a name for the out-group. So I don't mind race being used that way by black people, that, you know, we, as a Jewish person, we call ourselves a tribe, whatever. So that's fine. But to actually view humanity as divided into, you know, discrete races, and that children are avatars of those races and there's stereotypes attached to them, to me, that's racist. But no. Denying that there's systematic racism, or asking a question about which system is racist and what in the system is racist, that's now considered racist, right? I always say, you know, it's very easy to say, oh, the educational system, and, you know, the scholars from York and OISE together wrote a paper saying that Ontario's education system is the locus of genocide and cultural humiliation and destruction, something like that. And systematic racism. Okay, well, so point to what exactly in the system is racist. Like, where is it? Either by intent or effect. And if you can't point to it and tell me what it is, then maybe it doesn't exist. So why don't we do that, right? Like, clearly racism used to exist. We used to have quotas based on race and ethnicity. Like, in my parents' generation, their contemporaries, I mean, my parents didn't finish high school, but their contemporaries went on to university, couldn't go to universities because they had quotas on Jews. They had quotas on black people. They had quotas on indigenous people. We don't, I mean, I was about to say we don't have that anymore, but we do have that again. Isn't that racist? Denying white privilege. So saying that the kid of, you know, just Canadian background, European heritage, who, you know, had a drug addict mother, doesn't know their father, they bounced around in foster homes, they have nothing, no one ever took care of them, they themselves abuse substances, they have privilege. But, you know, the kid from Jamaica, whose parents are from Jamaica, who lives in Old Oakville and, you know, has a pool in the backyard, they're marginalized. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous, right? So, but if you say that, or you question that, you're racist. Microaggressions. So I find this interesting, again, as a Jewish person, that, you know, if you ask any Canadian, where are you from? You know, where's your family from? Which is generally a conversation starter in any multicultural country, right? So I don't agree that people only ask people who have darker complexions, you know, where their family's from. We all ask that question of each other, because unless you're First Nations, your family is from somewhere else. And even if you're First Nations, chances are that, you know, your tribe or band was from somewhere else, and you've got an interesting story, right? That's how we get to know people, right? But that's a microaggression. But somehow setting up an occupation and encampment and saying globalize the Intifada, that's not a microaggression. So again, well, that's because Jews are not considered marginalized, right, under this system. Eurocentric school curriculum, that's racist. Now, what they call Eurocentric is basically, you know, the fruits of international cultural exchange over centuries, right? All the way from Japan, all the way through to Portugal, where, you know, subjects such as mathematics, whatever, and including North Africa, right, through the Islamic Empire. But somehow that's all European, right? Like math is white, even though, you know, elements of math came from India, from China, from the Arab world, or whatever, but somehow math is Eurocentric and white. Meritocracy, well, anyone having natural talent or putting in effort is bad. Color blindness. So basically, if you believe in the kind of anti-racism that Martin Luther King Jr. promoted, right, that you not be judged by, you know, the skin-deep elements of yourself, now that's racist, right? We have to adopt the Black liberation movement's idea of separation from the states, in the States from the 1960s and 70s. That's anti-racism, right? But Martin Luther King Jr., he's racist now. Speaking of one human race, sort of saying, I don't believe in race. I believe that we are all equal, that yes, certain people have suffered, certain ethnic groups have suffered or whatever, but ultimately, like if we take off our skin, and you know, you've probably seen that meme with the skeletons, right? And it's like, we're all the same. So saying that's racist. Okay, critical theory-based curriculum. So some of you will recognize this. Project, inquiry-based, self-directed, right? Teacher has no role here other than designing the project, like saying to the kids, now you have to do a project, right? And these projects multiply. So that, like when I went to high school where we actually learned history or whatever, you know, I had to read textbooks, I had to write, you know, an essay, we'd have a test or whatever, but most evenings I was free to, I had a job, whatever, I had time to go in and work and be responsible. But no, I watched my kid, like I think in one course there were 30 projects, right? And what were those projects? Those projects were basically the kids figured them out, right? Like now they have AI. We're gonna talk about Google. Information can be looked up, right? But let's just talk about, leave AI aside for now, is that the kids go to Wikipedia, right? So, you know, the project is often on climate change. I think my kid did 7 projects on climate change in almost every subject. They didn't learn anything about the carbon cycle or technology or anything like that, or ocean currents or atmosphere, nothing. There was no instruction, but, you know, climate change is bad and capitalism is bad or whatever. So they go to Wikipedia, they copy, they paste it into slides, because now most projects are, you know, create a slideshow like I've done here. And then you reword the Wikipedia entry in the slides. You go to Google Images, you populate your slides with Google Images. If you're really technologically savvy, you might add music. And then you take the references at the end of Wikipedia and you put them through on the computer if the teacher wants Chicago style or APA 7, and so it converts all of those into that, and you put that as your last slide, and guess what? You get on a rubric of 4 out of 4, 4 out of 4. So now you have 100%. My kid got 100% in grade 12 English, and I was like, he's not Shakespeare. I don't get it. No practice, one and done. Right? That's what goes on. The kids do a project, it's quickly forgotten, they move on, they do some other project or whatever. By the end of the year, the kids don't remember a single thing that they did all year. The entire year was wasted. The entire year. Thematic, cross-curricular, looking for oppression, cross-curricular. You can't do anything cross-curricular unless you understand the curriculum in each subject area. Otherwise, you're talking out of your behind, right? Because how can you critically think and tie together themes from something, like if I said to you, you in the green shirt, if I said to you, okay, I'd like you to tell me how brain cancer is related to Antarctica and climate change, right? And do a project on that. I mean, that's the kind of cross-curricular nonsense that then comes out, oh, well, you're engaging critical thinking and you're doing your own research or whatever. It doesn't happen. Basically, the kids are not mastering anything. And now we're going to take a 5-minute intermission and then we'll continue. So get up and stretch and we'll be reconvening in 5 minutes.
All right.
How are you?
Yeah, so what I was thinking was we can
Hopefully you all got your popcorn and your drinks and your ice cream sandwiches at the drive-in commissary. All right, I'll just wait till you take your seats. All right, so just like I did last time, let's talk about the critical classroom, right? There's the critical classroom, stealing all the attention focus. I always say, teachers will put their kids either in little groups or in a U shape. So, here's the kid and they're staring at, the teacher's over here and there's another kid across the room going, and you sort of go, okay, well, where's the kid going to be focusing? Where the walls are plastered with colorful pictures and cutouts and drawings or whatever, and the teacher's talking about how to do long division or whatever. What's more interesting, like for the average kid? You gotta have a seriously motivated kid with finely tuned attention to block all of this out and focus on the teacher. These classrooms are terrible for learning, right? And in cognitive science, we say that this is extraneous stimuli, right? It doesn't contribute anything to learning. And of course we have, all the stuff about social justice and equity and white supremacy and what's a lesbian or whatever. And this is, elementary school classrooms or whatever. So, the focus is...
All women are lesbians?
That's right. So, not all women are, not all lesbians are women. Whatever nonsense is written on here. I mean, look, that's an interesting topic. I could see in post-secondary school, that's an interesting discussion. Like if we're decoupling sex from gender identity, what does that mean? Like I know some of my gay friends and lesbian friends say, well, what does that mean? Like if I am allowed to have sort of any gender identity, if I'm, used to think that I was just a butch lesbian, but I'm not actually, I'm a man, or I'm non-binary, then am I still a lesbian? Is she still my wife? But I'm not sure that that's a discussion that is required in grade 1 to 8. I'm not even sure it's a discussion in in secondary school. Certainly in university, might be interesting. But again, so I just want to remind you, what's better for student focus? And I think it's quite clear what's better for student focus. Oop. The role of the teacher in critical education. So, the role of the teacher, this comes from Geneva Gay, who came up with, there was already this stuff circulating in the 90s about critical pedagogy, but she sort of expanded on Gloria Ladson-Billings' writing about culturally responsive pedagogy, and she said, I'm going to make this more practical. So what does a teacher have to do? They have to learn every child in their classroom, their race, ethnicity, and gender identity before they step into the classroom. So they got to research, right, and make all sorts of conclusions without ever having met this human being about what that human being's about based on these categories. Then, apparently, every one of these identity categories has a different learning style. What's interesting is cognitive science basically says there is only one way to learn. Humans all learn the same way. It doesn't matter where you come from. You may have preferences, but the actual, what your brain is doing and what you need to do in order to put things into long-term memory is exactly the same. And in fact, seems to be the same for all mammals. And now we've realized it's kind of the same for birds, too. So it's probably like across the animal kingdom how we learn, right? Because our brains are structured pretty much the same. But apparently not the marginalized. They have a different way of learning that you have to figure out. And they give examples. If you read her paper, it's astonishing. Like she said, certain cultures are more, collective. And, she gives the example of like Hispanic culture or black culture is collective, but Asian culture is not. Well, that's ridiculous. We have studies that show that the reason why recent Asian immigrants do well is because even though they don't have money and they don't speak English, members of the community, lend each other school books and material and they tutor each other's kids because that's part of their culture. But she thinks that, this is all, if you have light skin, then you're highly individualistic and you don't like community. Like that, I guess that's probably news to light-skinned people who actually do have various communities and appreciate them. And therefore, once you know their learning styles, then you have to differentiate your instructions. You have 30 kids in the classroom, and you have to teach 30 different ways, depending on the ethnicity and gender identities. Of course, we consider intersectionality of all the children, which of course is an impossible ask and completely impossible. and irrelevant, because that's not how people learn anyway. The role of the teacher is to strengthen every marginalized identity. So they strengthen them by getting the kids to do projects on me. And you know what? That's what the kids do in grade 1. The whole grade 1 curriculum is all about me. And then it spans out a little bit in grade 2. Me and my family, and then me and my family and my community, and me. The message that children are being conveyed is you are the most important person in the world, and you're the center of the universe, and everyone should treat you like everything that you do is wonderful, you know, and not teach children the actual reality, which is life is not a bowl of cherries. No one cares about you except your parents and your good friends and your relatives, and you're going to have to make your way in the world, and life is tough, and you know, by working through that, you're going to find happiness, and you're going to find purpose in life. But no, it's all about me and my oppression, and how everybody's got to work to make me safe. There's another one, safety, right? It's all about safety. You look through all the curriculum documents in the last 5 years, it's safety, right? I mean, the world is not a safe place. If we teach children that they're supposed to be in a safe place all the time, we're doing them a disservice. We have to teach them how to be strong and have a strong back, because the world is not a safe place, and school shouldn't be a safe place, because school is a place where you learn, and that's not safe. That's challenging, right? It takes effort, and you might have to do things you don't want to do. Teacher's supposed to be not the expert in anything. Teacher's a guide on the side. Teacher just sort of floats around the classroom, making sure the kids are working on their individual projects, and they're the guide. And then the teacher has to ensure equal outcomes. So the current use of a 4-point rubric tries to basically do that, because basically you can only get between 0, which you would only get if you did nothing, and 4, which if you ticked all the boxes, and they separate it into like thinking and comprehension and communication, and these that are absolutely meaningless categories. Like somehow we don't trust teachers enough for them to read an essay and go, this is much better than the average in the class, and no one has done a better job, and they've said things here that really sparkle. I'm going to give this 80%, right? And the class average is 65, kind of like the way it used to be, the bell curve. But no, we want to make sure everybody gets an A, and that's why now kids going to university have to have a 95% average, because everyone has a 95% average. Does that reflect what they've learned, or what they know, or what they can do? Absolutely not. How critical teachers see their role. So this I took from the internet. This is a teacher in BC, Annie Ohana. If some of you follow some of the stuff on X, you may have seen this. She goes, yearly tradition, new voices, visuals to my classroom, excited for scavenger hunt with students are the connections they make to anti-oppression. And again, listen, anti-oppression is a worthwhile subject in post-secondary education, for sure, whatever. Is this appropriate for grades 1 to 8? Learning, we really wanted to, you should read some of the stuff by black scholars in the States who say, I would march into any school that told my children that they can't succeed because of the color of their skin. You wanna decapitate them now at this young age? Why would they bother making any effort if they can never succeed? What are you doing? Right? But look at this classroom, right? And forget about even the content of it. I don't really care less. I think these flags are silly. We're going to put flags for people's sexuality. Why are, your sexuality is your own business. You discover it, after puberty, and you should practice it. Kids are actually having less sex. They're just talking about their gender identities. They're not even having sex. Maybe if they were experimenting with sex, they might actually realize that that's enjoyable, and they kind of figure things out rather than just talking about their Judith Butler's gender theories. But again, the classroom, this is not a classroom for learning. It's absolutely distracting. What's the role of parents? So the role of parents in critical education is full involvement. Have a read. This is a science project that someone did as a joke. I'm sure any parents in the audience can probably identify with that. I've certainly been there. my son had a project. He had to create a juice box. He had to create like a food that was going to be healthy, and that he had to have like the nutritional information. Like it was basically an arts and crafts project, right? But it was for, who knows? It could have been for geography or science, or it could have been anything. It could have been math, for all I know. So, you know, he didn't know how to fold a piece of cardboard into a milk carton or whatever. So of course I had to sit with him. We looked on the internet, how to fold to create a milk carton, and so we made one. It took 2 hours. There were tears, there were interruptions. Part of it got, you know, torn. We had to redo it and whatever. Well, then he took it to school, and the teacher said, no, because we're having like a shop. You have to make 15 of those. Here's an example of a critical education activity. So have a read, and then what is wrong with this? So I looked, you know, the first thing that came to mind when I saw this, I mean, you know, I've seen the content a million times, so that doesn't surprise me. What bothers me is the spelling. How does this get put up on a board? Like, where's the lesson about spelling? Right? That's your role as a teacher, not this. Okay. Proof of critical pedagogy success when quantitatively tested. So this is the part that I love, because this is, you know, quantitative testing. In Canada, no research has been done on this at all. It wouldn't be allowed. So there's no way that we're going to see whether or not critical pedagogy actually does anything or makes a difference in anybody's life. But in the States, they did actually have a few scholars who went and did large-scale experimentation, like statewide. They also have, you know, statewide tests. So they actually can compare, you know, what students are doing in the critical pedagogy classroom to just a normal classroom. And by normal classroom, it's not, you know, cognitive science-based necessarily. It's just, you know, not as critical pedagogy as these classrooms. So this is what they found when students from a critical pedagogy classroom. That students believe in the oppressor-oppressed paradigm. That students believe you can divide society into the oppressed and the oppressors. Students believe that science is a myth. Well, I mean, that's great for, you know, the science classes and any innovation in the future. Children now believe science is just a myth, right? Because there's no absolute truth. Students believe that revolution is a moral imperative. Now listen, I don't have anything necessarily against revolution, theoretically. Certainly practically, if we look at the evidence, it's usually the cause of millions of deaths. You know, someone has a great idea, but, you know, it doesn't really work out in the wash because you have to force people through violence to change society. And we can't actually, I know critical theorists believe everything is constructed so that human beings, you know, they don't come with anything that's already hardwired, so we can just, you know, use constructivism to make them into whatever we want, right? I mean, you know, Lenin tried it, the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia tried it, Mao tried it during the Cultural Revolution. Probably not great. Something tells me most parents in Canada would not be in favor of that. The students in the critical pedagogy classrooms who are of the identity group that is the focus of the critical pedagogy report that they don't feel that they belong in society. So that's one of the results of doing it. And then if there's other students, in one classroom as an example, when they're giving examples, it was mostly an African American class, and there were a few Brazilian students. And the Brazilian students felt like no one cared about them all year. Like that their existence was irrelevant, right? Because this didn't address them, and the teacher didn't know anything about Brazilian culture, and her focus was on Native and African Americans. Academic achievement, right? No effect. And they tried. They tested, and they tested again, and over again, and it doesn't raise academic achievement. Okay, so when we look at our parental concerns under the two policies, okay, under critical theory and pedagogy, merit, bad, cognitive science-based pedagogy, good, right? We should reward people for hard work and talent. De-streaming under critical pedagogy, that's a good thing because we need equal outcomes. Under cognitive science-based pedagogy, it would be irrelevant because we wouldn't be streaming to begin with, because we would have that reverse engineered curriculum where you could move up or down depending on what you needed in order to learn. And then once you split off in grade 11 and 12, if math is not really your thing and literature is or whatever, you're not going to take advanced math courses. Foundational math, of course, is a terrible idea under critical theory. They're the ones that talk about 2 + 2 = 5. And the reason why they say that is they're trying to prove that we can construct numbers to be anything, right? And they only say that because they're not mathematicians, so they don't understand math. So all the critical theorists who are inventing new math, which is called, there's ethnomathematics, and there's also something called mathematics, which has got an X at the end, and none of it has anything to do with math, but it's about reconnecting with patterns in nature and climate change and decolonization and all the wonderful things that are going to end up with rainbows and unicorns. Tech over manual, critical theory, probably in favor of tech because everything's a self-directed project. Cognitive science-based pedagogy, as we said, no. Focus on learning disabilities. Well, yes, you've got a disability. Suddenly you're marginalized, right? That you want to be marginalized. You want to have more resources. You want extra time. You don't want to have to take tests. You don't want to have to take tests in the room. You're never going to learn like how to confront your fears. You're going to be bubble wrapped and protected. Well, critical theory says, we have to do that for you because you're marginalized. Of course, cognitive science-based pedagogy, we don't focus on learning disabilities unless we need to, right? Does someone actually have a disability, and do they need a specialized teacher who understands that disability and will help that student work, right? And accomplish as much as they can. But that's not the 30% of Ontario students. Parent involvement, critical theory, well, yes, assuming that the parent involvement is community activism and bringing in activists who support critical theory. Cognitive science-based pedagogy says, parents have enough to do. They have jobs, they're raising children, they should have family time. We can't expect them to be, teachers, and they're not trained. So they shouldn't be doing that. Mastery, well, of course, critical theory and pedagogy doesn't care about that because it's one and done, there's no practice. Cognitive science-based pedagogy, of course, that's the goal. Class activism, critical theory and pedagogy, yes, that's the goal. That's their goal, right? Cognitive science-based pedagogy, no. I mean, the teacher's it's not about your activism. You don't know enough. Like, do you know enough? Like, say the student walkouts now for Gaza. Those students, have they studied Middle Eastern history? Do they know anything about Middle Eastern history? Like, are they, you want to teach them Middle Eastern history as part of world history? That's great. I mean, they should learn that, right? And if you want to have differing voices, you could bring in different speakers and you can have debates. I mean, there's many ways where you can create learning, but encouraging kids, giving them a sign or telling them what to write on a sign and sending them out the doors, that's not learning anything. Arts education. Well, in critical theory, I suppose, like if you're making activist signs or anything in service of critical theory, that's fine. But under cognitive science-based pedagogy, the arts is a critical part of an education, right? Everyone should learn to read music. Everyone should learn the fundamentals of drawing. Everyone should learn fundamental, folk dances or whatever. That should be part of our curriculum. Self-directed projects, of course, critical theory loves it. Cognitive science-based pedagogy says it's the worst way to learn, and who it's worst for is children from low SES families. They have no one to help them. They don't have the background knowledge to do these projects. They may not even have the technology to do these projects. They're the ones who lose out the most. Discipline. Well, of course, critical theory doesn't like it because we're supposed to disrupt and decolonize and whatever. Cognitive science-based pedagogy discipline is very important because you need a quiet classroom where children learn and practice attention and focus. Canadian identity under critical theory is terrible because Canada is a racist country that should cease to exist, and showing any admiration for this country that people come to, presumably because it's a good place to live, very bad. Cognitive science-based pedagogy says, well, we have to have that as a nation. I mean, that's how you nation build, right? The children are our future. Teach them well. So yes, very important. Jeff talked about this, the Canadian public views. So just again, 92% of Canadians are against categorizing identities as privileged and oppressed. 85% are against teaching that there's no biological sex, only gender. 62% don't want a curriculum tailored to identities, right? So we've got a breach of a social contract here, because who is paying for public education? It's the people who live here through their taxes. The government doesn't have money, they have your money, right? So there's a social contract. In fact, the Education Act makes that clear that there's a social contract. So if the ministry is now promoting something against that social contract, against the interests of the majority of Canadians, that doesn't fulfill any of the objectives of education, then we have a real problem. Okay, we're going to get to my findings from my thesis. Which policy model is the Ministry of Education promoting? So the first time that we hear about the term critical pedagogy, and by that I'm talking about critical pedagogy, CRAP, culturally relevant, and like all those terms, but nothing else, just the terminology, and cognitive science terminology, and that again, just talking about learning science, it would be all the synonyms for that. Well, you can see we started a low end even in 2002. The light green is the cognitive science terms. And there's a slight increase to 2016. And then interestingly, in 2017 to 22, because I did this, because different documents are produced in different years, so I did it in 5-year intervals. 2017 to 2022, under the Ford government, there's a decrease in anything relating to cognitive science-based pedagogy. But look at the CRAP and how that rises way above. Now, the reason why cognitive science-based pedagogy was never popular during this time period, from the 80s onward, we're going to talk about the evolution of policy. But prior to critical theory coming in, we had child-centered or discovery learning. It was all the same ideas. So the idea that the child is wondrous, the child is curious, motivated to learn things, motivated to make a socially just world. I mean, I always say, if I look at all the adults who are my friends, how many of them are so curious or wondrous or motivated to do anything other than, sit and watch television? Like, people are not, like, there's the occasional kid or adult who's really motivated and a self-learner, but most people are kind of lazy. Like, we should acknowledge that and build a system around that fact, right? People are lazy. I mean, university professors know that. If you can get away without the reading, or you do them a favor and you record your lecture where you talk about the readings, you know that they're just going to watch your video and they're not going to read the articles. I mean, people are lazy. So critical theory, like, this was a nice fertile ground for critical theory to launch onto, because it was all about child-centered, project-based, about me, whatever. So that's why we see that there. Since 2002, when we had the first reference to CRRP, CRAP, now I'm using language beyond just the terminology. So all the language sourced from the literature that refers to things that are attached to cognitive science: long-term memory, short-term memory, retrieval practice, memorization, times tables, spelling, spelling bees, all those words, right? So we're looking at all those words, and they all basically, when you plot them out, they all have the same trajectory, and the same to do with critical pedagogy. So that would include anti-racism, anti-black racism, gender identity, identities, wellness, like that kind of stuff. So since 2002, cognitive science language is down 94%, so over a 20-year period. CRAP language is up 228%. Critical pedagogy, there is 2,016% more critical pedagogy language in ministry curricular documents than there is cognitive science-based pedagogy. Right? So there again we see the comparison of needs. So to understand, like, how do we get here, we have to think about the timeline of policy changes. So pre-1950s, it was a traditional teacher-centered, knowledge-centered, teachers convey knowledge. it might have been boring, it might have been harsh, there was certainly was the strap. I'm not saying it was wonderful. You know, I don't believe in the back to basics. I mean, I say back to science, and let's find out what works, right? But there were things that worked. Like, we did produce people who actually, like, knew stuff. So, 1950s to 1970s was the beginning. You know, it was the age of hippies. It was the age of, there were all sorts of reports produced in Ontario saying, you know, we need to be more child-centered. We have to cater to children. Let's have open classrooms. Let's have, you know, where children do whatever activities they want. It was the beginning of that, and we had some experimental schools, most of which failed. I think all of them failed. The beginning of that influence, and the appeal of constructivism, that, you know, there's no truth that everyone should learn, but rather, you know, children should construct their own reality, right? And their own truth. We can all have different realities. And that really got going. Like, that didn't really sink in yet, because we still had, remember, there's a lag, because you have teachers that are educated under the old system, right, who are still teaching according to the old system, even though there's the policy change. But then by the mid-'80s, you've got teachers coming in who've now been going to ed schools and learning all about child-centered and open classrooms and all this stuff. And so there's a noticeable shift. And there's a shift to child-centered. Children construct their own knowledge, right? And suddenly that's where we see, you know, where we have adults who grew up during that their handwriting looks like they're 5 years old. Or they can't spell, right? Or they can only use a calculator for math. Mid-1990s to the mid-2010s, the focus in Ontario in particular by the ministry was on closing gaps based on identity groups. So this is already from the Reich government. You know, there was a big sort of panic because of the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles and then the copycat riots in Toronto, and so they came out with an anti-racism policy with a focus on identities. Like, this is the first time you actually hear about identities. Just think back, like, nobody ever had an identity. Like, that was a psychological term, right? It leaked out of sort of scholarship from psychology, and now people talk, well, I identify as this, and I identify as, like, it's as if it's a piece of clothing that you put on, and you, like, we just used to say we are, like, I am a man, or I am Jewish, or I am a PhD student. You know, I mean, if I say I identify as a PhD student, you're not sure if I actually am or not, right? So that's the silliness of, like, the whole identity thing. So it was on closing gaps, and the explanation was that the gaps existed because of systemic racism, right? Of course, nobody talked about poverty, because then, you know, it comes up that the people who are, you know, often called the elites, who work in the bureaucracy, suddenly then they become accountable. So if we don't refer to, you know, socioeconomic terms, then they're not accountable, and they can run this sort of thing. But at least they were looking at closing gaps, right? At least they were interested in that, and they realized in order to do that, they were going to have to use learning science, because that was the only thing that was closing gaps. But then in 2015, until 2022, that ended. And as Andy Hargraves writes, he's an Ontario scholar about policy, and he says that we moved from the age of achievement and closing gaps to the age of well-being and identity, right? So that's the age that we're in now. That's the policy age. The focus is on disrupting the system, the shift from individuals to group focus, equality of outcomes, not equality of access. And then 2022 to the current, we're beginning to see a little bit of pushback. Now, you know, we do have a PC government here that, you know, we'll talk again about back to basics, which I always say is silly. But, you know, they kind of took seriously that children are not reading. Like, the Ontario Human Rights Commission basically found that 40% of the Canadian workforce is functionally illiterate. Like, that they don't have the automaticity to read, for sustained reading, to read 10 pages of anything, right? That's how bad it's gotten. So, you know, the Ford government said, well, maybe we should have phonics. But what did they do? They took the 350-page curriculum that's all critical theory, and they just dumped, like, a piece of it about phonics into it without any materials for teachers, no workbooks, no guidance, no step-by-step, and somehow the teachers are supposed to teach phonics while the students are expected to investigate oppression in society and deconstruct and produce media output that challenges the status quo in grade 1. Right? So what does a teacher do with that? Nothing. But really, The conflict between these two models is a conflict between facts and evidence versus feelings. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about now. Oh, not yet. The results of the study is the ministry's promotion of critical theory and pedagogy over time. So this is just looking at critical pedagogy. So from the period of 1997, when it first kind of starts to appear in terminology, there's a 1,730% increase. And you can see that, 2012 to 2016 is Kathleen Wynne's government. And the predecessor Liberal government. 2017 to 22 is the Conservative government. And you would think that for all the talk about we're getting rid of this woke nonsense or whatever, that's not actually the case in the ministry, which either tells you that they don't care about education or that the minister in charge of education doesn't know what his bureaucracy is doing. In terms of critical pedagogy itself, since 2002, there's been an 1,825% increase in that terminology in the curricular documents. And these are documents, just curriculum and teacher resource. So these are focused on use in the classroom. In fact, the PCs have produced documents that contain 83% more critical theory language. So that's the whole panoply of critical theory language than the previous Liberal governments. They're just not transparent about it. So the bureaucracy churns and self-replicates and grows and whatever, and the politicians make noise, but they're not actually taking care of their ministry. So, and you have to remember that it's the ministry policy that then dictates board policy, which then dictates what the principal's policy is, teacher policy, what teachers are learning in ed school or whatever. That's where it starts. And maybe that's where our attention must be in terms of making change. And I mean change to a cognitive science-based pedagogy. I'm going to tell you what that transformational change is. All right, so this is where I wanted to talk about. Critical theory claims that it's all about empathy for the marginalized. Under its influence, we talk as if empathy is always a good thing. But in a tolerant society, empathy can be used by intolerant, loud, angry, and self-interested people to game the system. A focus on empathy makes people want to appear moral and to be socially accepted. And it can be abused by those whose livelihoods depend on getting people on board with their agendas. In any event, its feelings are a terrible way to set policy. Sympathy is better. There's a word that we used to use that now has been replaced. And the reason why sympathy is better is because sympathy allows us to use our rational minds to care enough to solve a problem. Empathy pushes away inconvenient facts and evidence because it's about feelings. The adoption of critical theory and pedagogy owes much to empathy, right? I don't doubt that some of the practitioners of it are really empathic people that feel other people's pain and feel other people's marginalization. Overall, I find teachers to be very empathic people, right? But being empathic isn't going to help you in terms of designing things that work because it ignores the facts and evidence, it ignores measuring outcomes. It is the road to hell paved with good intentions. So sympathy for groups who are struggling is a better policy initiator because it's more detached, it's more rational, it's open to criticism. People are not going to be defensive about it because it's not about their feelings, and therefore it's more likely to produce better policy. So I'm going to conclude with with kind of a quote that I made. That I want to share with you. This is my position statement, which in critical theory is called positionality. If you can't plainly and transparently set out the attainable goals of an educational theory, methodically operationalize it, and then measure whether it accomplishes the goals you set out, then the academic theory isn't worth the paper it's written on, or the energy used to digitally produce it. Critical pedagogy has almost no public support. It offers teachers no attainable goals, no way to operationalize it in a multicultural classroom of 30 children, and no means to measure its success. And by that I mean academic achievement. It's fine as an intellectual exercise to critique society from the rarefied era of the ivory tower. And I say that with respect. because that's what universities do, right? We think. So it's fine in university, but it has no place in the classrooms of our country. Did you want to?
I thought I can maybe talk during the question and answer, so I thought, why don't we open it up to the audience
Sure.
at this point? So.
Your turn. Do you want to throw up your hand and I'll call on you? Yeah.
So a question for either one of you, since you have worked so much with digital data, you know, another thing that I have heard that is sort of a catchphrase that is, in my way of thinking, meaningless is digital-driven or data-driven policies. And it's like,
As
what
a bad
data
thing.
and how are you doing it and how are you structuring the data? What are you looking at? What are the values? What are the paradigms that you start out with? And yet, our policy is data-driven.
Well, it's not. I mean, but by data-driven, and I'll tell you, when I started my program, I decided I was going to go, they used to have, they stopped doing it, but they used to have an OISE where you could attend, people who were doing their PhD could have like a practice run on Zoom, and they would present their research. And I would say that, like, the kind of research I heard was, like, one woman was dreaming of turtles, and then she went to a pet store and she saw turtles in an aquarium, and she realized that this was a prophetic vision, and so she started talking to her friends who were teachers about her prophetic vision of turtles, and they realized, I mean, you know what's coming, right? Turtle Island. And that they would keep a diary of their prophetic dreams, and that then they would do this in the classroom, and her research was really sort of like an ethnographic study of how many children also dreamed of turtles, right? Data-driven, right? Because the qualitative researchers who do that kind of qualitative, I'm a principal, I spoke to 3 other principals that I know, and we all agreed that we suffer from white supremacy, and we're trying to decolonize our minds. Right? So I'd be ask a question, I go, okay, so I'm just curious, like, short of a brain injury, I'm not sure you can actually remove information from a mind. So how do you decolonize a mind? Like, how can you operationalize it for me? This is how you challenge the critical theorist. Operationalize it for me. How do you do it? And they go, well, you just, you have to engage in self-reflection. And I go, what does that mean? Like, operationalize self-reflection. Like, what am I actually doing? Right? I've done a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy. I understand how that works or whatever. I have, tasks. I have to think about changing my behavior and my reactions to things. I might want to give myself reminders. Dealing with my mother, I got a turtle. I could stick the head of the turtle inside the turtle to replicate the fact that my mother doesn't like to talk about feelings. So I remembered not to talk about feelings when I talk to her. I mean, how do you decolonize the mind? Whatever, and they're like, well, we have to decolonize the mind because there's climate change. Right? So that's the data-driven.
Driven.
Right. Anyone else? Or yeah.
Just kind of expanding on that. How much are we supposed to take then? Because I'm just thinking of even a new video that just came out, 15-minute video that our director sent out. And I watched it, and I felt very demoralized because I know there are so many lies in that video. Because I've been so involved with the board that I know that there's manipulation in that video. I know that there are lies in that video. When he talks about the data, he talks about the strat plan, and anyone who knew about the strat plan, he'll say, with the guidance of the trustees. Okay, well, we know some trustees did not approve of this strat plan. They weren't consulted, actually. Talks about, and it's 10,000 people that we consulted, and it sounds so great. Well, we have 64,000 students in this, and majority says just over 5,000. Okay, so you just got over 5,000, and you're saying this is a good strat plan, and it's just, how much are we supposed to take when they say that it's data driven, and it's just a bunch of lies?
So, I mean, here's my advice, and here's I think because I was so lucky to find a supervisor like Scott, and we're so ad idem about things, and he challenges me, right? Like, back that up, and let's see the evidence, or show me an article, or whatever. But a lot of this comes down to personality. Not everyone feels comfortable standing up and with a smile on their face, just saying, I'm not sure that that's true. Can you show me the study and send that out? I'd like to read that study that says that, because that doesn't strike me as true. I don't know if that's actually helping our children, and I want to help the children. Can you do that for me? Right? Ask them to operationalize. Now, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, and I recognize, right, there's two personality types. There's the introvert and the extrovert. Extroverts love to be on stage. I don't know if you noticed, I'm an extrovert. And they'll put themselves out there. And particularly if you're not abrasive, right? Because you want to convince people. So delegate that task to an extrovert who will feel comfortable standing up and saying, I've got to ask you, you've got to show me that evidence. I have some real doubts about that, and I'm concerned about the children. I want the children to do well, and I don't think that this video contains accurate information.
Maybe to connect the 2 points, I would say that, just from my perspective, that the real, authentic use of data and evidence is on the decline and has been for about the last decade. So the rhetoric of being data-driven is out there, but it's not the reality. I think people are just using it as part of their marketing ploy in bureaucracies and administrations. I'm telling you, they're not data-driven. It's like the opposite is happening.
Follow the science.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation, I gotta say. So I told you earlier, I'm a law student and used to being in long lectures. This is the first, probably thing in 5 years that I've actually been able to pay attention to from start to finish. So I just want to thank you for that. But
Can I share something with you about learning science? I bet that you sit through slides where they've written everything that they say on the slide. Now, if you know anything about learning science, you have 2 channels. You've got a visual channel and you've got a verbal channel for hearing and reading. You can't hear and read at the same time. If the person has a slide with all the words of what they're saying, whatever, either you're reading the slide and not hearing them, or you're hearing them and not reading the slide. And it's taxing on your working memory to try and do both, which is why it becomes boring and tedious, right? So you might have noticed that I had very little text on these slides. Now, what does work is pictures, because pictures help you. You're listening to me. That information is going through the auditory channels, and through the visual channel, you're associating it with a picture. You won't forget some of those pictures, right? You're going to associate with them, with the information, and then you're going to remember it. So for those of you who do produce slideshows, remember that. And I beg you to look up some of the learning science stuff about making slideshows to make your slideshows stick, because you want that information to stick. But thank you.
no, of course. I mean, it worked. But so I have 2 questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The first touches on, so you've demonstrated to us that this critical pedagogy has really seeped into schools. And my perspective is this, as somebody who wants to have kids in this decade, my thought process is this, taking aside the option of private school for a second.
Which you should know, Scott ran a study on private schools and how they advertise themselves to the public. We looked at how many? 1,200?
Like all of them.
Yeah, but it was
Yeah.
1,200 in Ontario. I think there was 3%, because then I did a little research paper for Scott. 3% of them use something other than the Ontario curriculum, which means only 3% of those private. So you can pay a lot of money for the same education you're getting at a public school, but with gold pencils.
Yeah, that's essentially one thought that I have. So, assuming it's a binary choice between going to public school or homeschooling your children, you also mentioned the reality that most working families have both parents that work. But the way that I'm looking at this, both from your presentation and just being alive in the world and looking at X and seeing some of these other teachers that are on there, is not only are you, to use your term, having wasted time in school, not learning anything good or much good at all, but you're actually now at risk of further indoctrinating your children, having them believe that they're something that they're not, or creating a bunch of problems that way. So I don't see the positive in sending your children to school anymore.
Socialization.
Well, that's the only it, right? So you measure socialization, but from an academic perspective, there's none. So then the question,
Unless you happen upon like a very good teacher who knows their role, like
there are
as we
some.
discussed, and they exist. I've spoken to them. Those teachers exist. I was at a learning science convention. It was full of teachers, right? They were saying, "I'm doing this secretly because if my principal found out, I'm not allowed to teach anything directly. If my principal found out, I'd be in the shithole. But I'm going to do it."
Stephen, you can't teach anything directly. What do you mean by that?
Meaning that at their particular schools that a teacher's not allowed to say, we're not doing projects. Like maybe we'll do one project for the term and we'll work on it in class, everyone together. But you're not getting projects. There's nothing online for you to go to look at projects. I'm actually we're going to have a book. And you're going to go through it, you're going to practice, there's work things, we're going to have quizzes, there's going to be a test, we're going to evaluate you and make sure that you understand this information. And then, once you understand it, can actually apply it to a new situation. So that the teacher is the center of the classroom. So, for example, a teacher said, I'm really interested in learning science. I didn't decorate my classroom. I had all the decorations at the back of the classroom. I had my desks in rows, and the principal walked in and said, "This is not a fun classroom." And the teacher said, "But this is a classroom for learning." He said, "This classroom has to be fun. The kids have to come in and it has to be joyful with decoration." And, so that's the kind of thing that I mean by direct instruction is a scripted form of instruction. Again, that, it's the ministry's job to provide the curriculum, not the teachers. Stage down. A teacher that adopts that, there are actual direct instruction programs from grades 1 to 12. They're all American, of course, or British, none Canadian. And teachers can use them, and teachers do sneak them in, and they will, sort of revise things to make it, because they feel a responsibility to all their students, right? Not just to the middle class ones or the ones who go to, a math gymnastics class. So there are those teachers out there, but I think that a lot of teachers really feel, because of their empathy, they feel that they must root out oppression, and that's their primary goal. I mean, I had someone in one of my classes say, "I only use critical pedagogy in the classroom. I walk in and I know everyone's race, and I teach according to their racial identities and their gender identities." And I said, okay, let's operationalize that. You walk into a classroom, grade 3 classroom, whatever, typical Ontario classroom, kids, of all shades and colors, the rainbow. We're a multicultural society, whatever. You see someone, how do you know what their ethnicity is? Do you ask? Do you ask their parents? Do they have to fill out a sign? I said, and even if they are, right? Like maybe they're of Punjabi heritage, but maybe they've been here already 3 generations, and their family kind of assimilated. Like they're not really into their culture. They don't know anything about their culture. They're just Canadian. Whatever. How do you know the level of their affiliation, even? And you know what her response to me was? "You're an old white man." Right? So I said, well, clearly now I need a safe space, because I haven't identified myself at all. You don't know if I'm old, if I'm a man, or if I'm white.
So anyway, in that sense, what would you say is the ideal solution there for? Is it homeschooling to the best of your ability, assuming again a working family with two parents? I mean, I know a family personally that does that. One's a nurse and the other one is a corrections officer, I think. So they both do shift work, but anyway, I think they can.
So when you get beaten up in prison,
Yeah.
put on your bandages.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's essentially my question: is the solution just based off the facts? Well, you got to homeschool because the alternative is worse, or do you see something else?
Listen, I wish I were the grand poobah and had like a definitive answer for you. I'll tell you what I did. My kid went to school. I didn't care if he we all understood that you can't fail. I mean, the only way you can fail is that at the end of every year, and this is true in high school, that there's 2 days for credit recovery. So if you have 0 because you didn't do any of your projects, they'll give you like a coloring assignment, like make a poster and whatever, and then you get 51%, so you pass. And your marks are irrelevant really until grade 12. So my son took the tactic of, if there was a project that actually interested him, he would just work on that project and he'd produce something beautiful. Like, it wouldn't be a slideshow, he'd actually write a 20-page essay or whatever, because I taught him how to write. And so his marks were always terrible because he'd get very good mark on the 2 assignments he did, and on the 28 assignments he didn't do, he got 0. And then he would go to credit recovery and make a poster, and he would pass until grade 12, and they understood, okay, this year I actually have to do all 30 projects in every subject, and in order, so my choices are open if I want to go to university. What I did is I said, look, I don't care if you do any of these useless projects. I mean, he would show them to me, I'd be like, okay, useless, so I don't care, but we're gonna run a homeschool. So you do this, go to school, have fun, like do extracurricular activities, if you have a good teacher, pay attention, always be respectful, like learn all the things you need to learn. That way, I don't care about the projects. And when you come home, and I bought an atlas, and we studied the globe, and in studying the globe, then we started looking at books of world history, and then works of fiction that were tied to that. And he always had a novel going. I mean, we went to the library, and I would be like, okay, here's your choices, and I would give him a list of the great classics of English literature. And I said, pick a book, whenever, and every Friday we're going to have a discussion where we're going to do novel study. I'm going to teach you about metaphor and simile and imagery and foreshadowing and then we're going to read poetry. I mean, he had one assignment in grade 12, write a play. They didn't read any plays. Like, you speak about playwright. I'm also, like, in addition to all those other things I do, I'm also an actor and a singer. And I don't act professionally anymore, but I used to. And so I have tons of plays at home and whatever. And I was just thinking, like, all the playwrights that I know, they would be insulted, like, that you can just go write a play. Whatever. So I said, you know what? You're going to hand in this assignment late. We're going to read plays. We're going to read some Shakespeare. We're going to read some modern plays. We're going to read some David Mamet, who writes like in a style that is like just like speaking and whatever. And then we talk about, what do you notice in this? Oh, people aren't actually talking about their conflict. The conflict is the subtext. People are having conversations that are not about the conflict or whatever. Okay, write me a scene like that. And then I critiqued it, and I was like, no, this is obvious. I could see this coming 5 minutes ahead. That's boring, whatever. Like, this is what a teacher should be doing with red pen, right? And then he finally produced a 10-page play that was fantastic, right? Teacher loved it. Oh my God, he's a playwright. Well, it didn't just happen. You know anything about playwriting, right? So, look, if you can, run a homeschool after school. School is 6 hours long. You know what? The amount of actual content doesn't take that long, right? A lot of it is practice. And if they did that in school, there'd be a lot more time for recess and free time and play and sports and musicals that they've removed from schools and plays and band and all of those great things, right? Because not everyone's academically inclined. And that was the other point that I was going to make, right? That if you're a fantastic athlete or a fantastic musician or an artist or drafter or whatever, that's good. Is that not good? So maybe you're not good at school, but you're good at that. Like, let's not say that the equal outcomes have to be academic, right? Because we don't look at sports and go, oh, we don't have this right racial representation in sports, so we've got to disrupt that and have equal outcomes, because all of those things are important, right? So let's put schooling and academia in its proper place. But yeah, I think if you can, you know, you're privileged enough, there I'm using the term properly, and you can, then do that. And talk to other parents. If you're a teacher, talk to other teachers. You got to go beyond the principal and the board are terrified about losing their jobs. They're not going to help you. They're not interested in change. You got to go up to the ministry. When people start talking to the minister, right, and protesting in front of the minister, particularly teachers, right? Teachers are standing outside saying, we're not here because of money or sick days. We're here because your educational policy is harming children. That's how we
Okay,
can change.
well, thank you very much, Stephen. I think we're almost at 9 o'clock here, so I think we better wrap up. But that was you ended on a very good note. That sounds like an action item to start to radicalize some teachers in a correct way. All right, so thank you again very much, Stephen and Scott, for coming all the way from Toronto. That was really informative. We really appreciate it a great deal. Let's give them a big
I'm here for a few minutes if so Scott, if you want to come up to us personally for a couple minutes, that's great. Spread the word if you'd like us to come back or come back for your organization. We'd be happy to do so. We want to spread the good word.
Amazing.